Thank you, Melanie and Arnessa and Karen as well. And each one of you who is participating in this, I'm excited to get a chance to introduce you to the lab manual that you'll be working with for multiple reasons. I am a family and consumer sciences teacher by profession. Vocational was the old-fashioned way we called it, but career and tech was a big piece of what I was engaged with in the classroom and then also with my career. So we are going to look at who, what, where, why, how, home to career, the classroom and the lab can best work with you in terms of baking and milling and grain science professions. Next slide, please. You have in your possession either a USB or print version of this lab manual, and it began because of you, not you personally, but because of the profession. When I first took my job with a test kitchen in Manhattan, Kansas, I was in the shadow of the university, Kansas State, and one of the head professors there with family and consumer sciences came to me and she said, Sharon, of all the things you could do here at this test kitchen, it would be to help us have more science-based FCS foods resources to teach with. Thank you, Dr. Wisman. And I took that to heart, although I wasn't sure that I was the one for the job because I personally barely could take organic chemistry and get a C. So I worried about it. I thought, how can I do this? But a test kitchen is steeped in the process of science. It's all about what the ingredient functions are and how they interact. And if you want to switch one thing, what will happen? So I became really excited and interested in this because I could focus on baking, grain science, and nutrition. So my next interaction that really kept me going in this lineup was a friend of mine named Connie Neiman, who was a high school FACS teacher, and she had called my colleague Cindy Falk and said, "Is there any baking science teaching resource for a secondary FCS teacher?" There was none. There were culinary textbooks. There were all kinds of baking science textbooks from Kansas State, but nothing that a high school or junior high FACS teacher could use. So this inspired me. I took from my career being a home visitation FACS person. I worked in extension. I was then in the test kitchen and had also taken on the opportunity to teach part-time in a 7th and 8th grade setting. I had 42-minute class periods and I was determined to teach baking. So if I could talk to each one of you out there, you would say, 42 minutes is my worst dream. That's true. That's why I don't teach baking, Sharon, is because I only have 42-minute class periods, or maybe 50. But how in the world do you get 7th and 8th graders focused enough to complete baking activities or recipes within that classroom? So I began working on that in my own classroom. Connie Neiman and I worked hard on putting together the first series. And from there, we began testing and revising until we're now at the 3rd edition, which is in your hands. So FACS teachers of today also have the challenge that you may not have the same background as Connie and I had. Being senior level teachers here, senior citizens, if you will, in the FACS profession, we really have had a lot of experience, but we also had a lot of introductory experience at the college level. I had literally 8 different lab settings in which I could learn about foods, quantity, food preparation, food safety, nutrition. All of those labs were there for me. And today's FACS teachers are graduating in a much different environment. That's why the lab manual is so important in my estimation from that experience. Next slide, please. I designed it because I wanted to bridge home and career. So this is extremely important to those who are focused on career or CTE. It's also extremely important to the person who's focused in home or community nutrition. So if you look at those who are engaged in getting a bachelor's degree in baking science, Aaron Clanton is their teacher, primary teacher in the entire country. And he is a friend of mine. He said, I asked him, how many of your students really begin at home with their baking passion? And he said, Nearly or over 50% every year that are new in my courses have begun at home, and 4-H or FACS classes all played an important role. Sometimes that's good, sometimes it's not. They have to unlearn things or they have to learn greater scope of technique. But regardless of that, if you go to his website, which is futureinbaking.com, you will have a lot of information that will help you look at that career side of baking. The lab manual itself, which he uses in his coursework for the general student population, he has a course that he offers to them. He offers the best baking practices he can, and the lab manual was designed so that you could apply them both at home and in a career development strand. So measurement, for example, we want accurate volume measurement. We want the right technique used. That is a test kitchen technique of volume measure. And then there's the scale, which is the most accurate way to bake, and also portion ingredients as well as product. So measurement has to be accurate. We have to have ingredient function knowledge, whether we're at home or in the classroom. How do you handle those ingredients and how do you store them? How to use the best by dates, which is a really big deal right now. A lot of people throw away a lot of ingredients because it's past its date. But what they don't realize is that that product still might be usable. It's just a best by date. So all of those pieces of ingredient knowledge are something that can be applied at home or whether you're working in a culinary setting. Equipment, well, yes, they vary widely between the home equipment, which can be frankly kind of dismal or non-existent sometimes, to the quality that you would use in a real bakery. But there is transferable knowledge between the type of bakeware it is, the oven type it is, the accuracy of the temperatures, for example, that you use, are all transferable knowledge. So the process temperatures, how cold does the butter need to be when you cut it in versus when you cream it? What does room temperature mean anyway? Internal temperatures for doneness. These are things that I never did in home baking until I began to think about what's the best practice. So now I take internal temperatures so I don't wonder if my muffins or my banana bread is done at center and safe to eat. These are practices that can be transferred to the person at home as well as in a professional setting. What temperature should things be when you store them so that they aren't too hot at center? When will they have the best quality for freezing or holding over for the next day? All of those temperatures and baking food safety pieces are part of this lab manual. What we hope you do is that you take that, if you're teaching Serve Safe, you take your Serve Safe and add the baking guidance that we give you, because there isn't a lot of it in a Serve Safe course. On the other hand, if you're a home baker and 90% of your students may well use this only at home or community settings, well, that's okay too, because they are going to want to use it to be sure that what they're doing is of the best quality. Product, portion control, handling, packaging, these are all things that are better done at home as well as in the professional career baker world. And that proper cooling and serving, freezing, refrigeration that I mentioned makes the difference between whether a product is stale the next day or not. And home is where I started my questions, because I would wonder why my bread got so stale within a day, or why did my cookies get so crumbly? Those all have to do with temperature, hydration of the dried fruit or the flour. These are all pieces of the puzzle that we try to address in the lab manual. It's consumer sciences too, because whether it's at home and you're trying to please the consumer that you serve there, or whether you're trying to win new customers in your coffee shop or bakery, it all takes consumer science, which is part of what FACS is about. but we so often forget about that consumer science strand. So it's woven throughout the lab manual. And then finally, the terms and techniques we use, we might as well learn the best terms and techniques. And we provide you, we'll look at it in a few minutes, a full glossary to guide you. We don't have to read through the whole right side here, but just to assure you that each of the labs is fully aligned with the FACTS national standards. It's also aligned with STEAM education, which aligns with pathways in career and tech. And then the 21st century guides that we were given a few years ago, we also wanted to be sure those were considered as we went along too. So when you look at that lab manual, each of your labs will include these pieces. They'll include an introduction for you to use to help you introduce the topic unless you want to write your own. It will have stated outcomes. It will be aligned with the standards. It will have terms and techniques, a whole sidebar of that, and we'll show you that in a minute. But all of those terms and techniques are located in our glossary, which we'll also visit in a few minutes. So you're not left to just find all of those definitions, or to decide, maybe you don't even know what they mean, or you don't have a resource that supports it. All of that is handed to you, provided you, encouraged for you to access in the glossary. We offer skill drills, and some of them are kind of weak, I admit. I wasn't sure. How do you teach someone a skill drill about cracking or breaking an egg open for the first time? And you may say, well, that's just not going to be my students, but I had juniors in high school in my workshops that had never cracked it, never opened an egg to use it in the baking we were doing. So you never know, do you? You just never know when a skill drill might help them do something without ending up with egg literally on the floor or all over their clothes or apron or baking lab coat. So the labs for both computer and baking science are in every lab or nearly every lab. So we'll highlight those as well. Ingredient functions are all there for each category. We offer you critical thinking questions and answers for you to either read yourself and consider how you would say it better than me, which would be perfectly fine. I don't dictate this has to be it, but we do offer you the answers for the critical thinking questions that I wrote. And those critical thinking questions are great for formulating evaluation at the end of the use of that particular lab or section. Baking production labs are there for you. So you have what in the home term is recipes. You have 3 levels of recipe, or if you wish to call them formulas, they are both. They are in both volume measurement and also in weight, so that if you're a culinary classroom, you can apply it as a weight versus a volume measurement. There are 3 levels, one for the person who's hardly ever baked at all, the one who's maybe kind of in the middle somewhere. They've done it a few times, but they're not sure of their skills. And then finally, there's the more advanced formula that we recommend that you try or use in the labs. And then there's the local connections. So in smaller towns like mine or maybe some of yours, there may not be so many career people who are bakers. You may not have a lot of connections with how to connect this to careers. You also may not know how to connect it exactly within the community. So we offer you at the end of each lab a service learning idea, some way to connect the practice and skills you learned in that lab locally. And that fits well with FCCLA and also career and tech because it gives you that extra level of application. Next slide, please. And Melanie, if you want to speak to the science piece at any point, please just raise your hand or dive in. Food is fabulous, and what the goal of the lab manual is to be sure that everyone would be assured of good food and they could share it among family and friends. That's what baked goods are all about, is to do something great for someone you love. It's more than just about convenience, meaning you can find a more convenient way to prepare or bake the products that are in the lab manual. Many of them, you might be able to buy a frozen biscuit, or you might be able to buy a canned one. You might be able to buy a mix. And we do refer to the comparison between those products for cost and convenience. So, but no matter how you do the preparation of a baked good, we want to encourage that opportunity to savor what you produced and to not be afraid that there won't be enough to go around or that I won't be able to do this skill. We all have to start somewhere. And that whole thing about food preparation is to feel comfortable starting and not being afraid that the outcome won't be perfect. Which in this generation that I've been teaching of late, it feels like there's more fear than ever along those particular educational lines that they won't succeed or that maybe they do a task once. I've made scones, but they've only done it once. And that isn't in the world of baking, that isn't enough. You develop a hand, an ability to check the sensory aromas and flavors. And that again is part of the sequence of the lab. So we know that food is essential to energy, but grain foods are perhaps more so than most and they serve a really important role worldwide. 20% of the energy of all the population of the world is provided by primarily wheat and then rice. And it's all part of health and culture and success. And this lab is hoping you find great ways within its lab outline to do just that. One thing that we want you to consider is there a way to be sure that all the students in your classroom have a basic quality baking and cooking gear at home, a set? You may want to collaborate with local extension FACS professionals or chefs or FCS professionals in your region, citizens. And that's what we did here in our town. I was just passionate about this. I would teach a class and then there would be about a third of the class who have no baking pans at home, no measuring tools. And the goal of the lab is for you to be able to offer both. In other words, even if you do the culinary method of scaling ingredients, you will have at least demonstrated how to do this using volume measure so that the student can go home and do it at home. This is important because it allows them to actually develop their hand and observation of how a batter should look, how a dough should look. What does it look like and feel like when, for a pastry, you've cut in the fat properly, added enough water? You cannot learn that except to actually feel and experience it. So I can't solve all the ingredient problems, but I hope you as teachers will find a way locally to help your students have the tools they need to go ahead and produce some of the most basic recipes and formulas in the book, in the lab manual. And just to spur us on, forever, Family and Consumer Sciences had been about this very thing, to make sure that people at home know how to prepare food safely and that will be nutritious. And now the chefs are often taking that lead, even more so with the desire to see people have home food skills. Next slide, please. In the table of contents, and in a second, Arnessa will open that up to us. We have all of the labs outlined so that you can look at them and maybe access just one science experiment or one formula. Or maybe all you want to do is introduce eggs and baking. And so you go to the egg lab and you pick one science experiment there, egg substitutions, for example. And that baking science activity has been really popular with both my students and the adult teachers because every one of those is lined out for you, ready to go with guidance and rubrics in place. You have the first lab about why you're going to bake, and that is a consumer piece of it. People bake for 5 basic reasons. One is they believe that fresh is best. It's better than buying something already made and packaged. Some prefer it because they want to celebrate. I want something that will taste great for my great aunt's birthday party or the local community get together. Maybe it's nutrition you're really concerned about and you're wanting to do whole grain or you're wanting to find a way to add more fruits and vegetables to your diet. There's also the going green. Let's produce something that's locally made. And then finally, sometimes you're baking for someone who has a gluten-free need or a um, uh, dietary ingredient restriction, and that is also addressed in the fifth reason that people bake in Lab 1. The formulas are there, the guidance. Not Lab 2 is about getting started, the fundamentals you need to have skill to produce the rest of the recipes in the lab manual. And labs 3 to 11 are all ingredient based. They're categories that are divided up into grain, flour, fat, sugars, yeast, and other leavenings, etc. So that each one of those labs addresses just one segment of baking ingredients. And finally, lab 12 to 13 are about dough sculpting and pantry of resources. We'll talk more about those in a sec. Arnessa, let's look at lab 3 for a second. And if you have your lab manual open, just skip to lab 3. I see I skipped the table of contents. Maybe we'll come back to that. Lab 3, each lab has a divider, and if you stop here for a second, you'll see what I meant about terms of and techniques. There's an introductory phrase. There's outcomes cited. Okay, we can go on, scroll on down. Those terms and techniques are all in the glossary. We always offer you history and a timeline if possible, because food history is so fascinating. Here's the for teacher reference I had, where each one of those blue live links on your USB drive will take you to a research source that you may either use to edify yourself, or maybe it's a resource you can use within the classroom. And then the next page would be the skill drill and the computer lab. So skill drills will usually be, maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 options of what you could do to help the student learn more about that particular ingredient. And the computer lab takes them on a deep dive. It's a great thing for them to be assigned some. You can't assign them all, but you might divide them up and have them do a deep dive into those websites. And then next page shows you how they can use the worksheet to outline what they learned about that ingredient at that site. Now, each lab does not have this same worksheet. This is particularly one for the grain one. Then you'll follow with a baking science lab. And in this case, I offered extra information on flour and cornmeal because there are so many types in the grocery store or available to us. And that is part of what we want them to learn. So flour is not just flour. And the sooner we all really absorb that fact, we will solve a lot of problems either at home or in the lab. So it will give you a clue as a teacher that, I used this all-purpose flour last year, and this year I decided to save money and I got this brand. Why don't my recipes turn out the same? Or why did I have a failure? This lab is the one that helps you prove that both to yourself and to your students. So if you scroll down the science of that, and yes, we also emphasize whole grain. There's so much we emphasize in this lab manual, but whole grains are woven in throughout it. We have infographics like the what is gluten, that's in the appendix. The baking science lab then is all about taking 5, maybe even take more types of flour and comparing their absorption and gluten development just by adding water to a precise amount of flour. You do a stir test, and you'll be able to observe the difference between those flours immediately. I developed this particular experiment because I didn't like taking the time to do gluten balls and washing them. And a lot of my students, it just took forever and made a big mess. So I created this activity to let us get some of the impression of the difference between flours at the same time they are able to see the gluten develop or not in their flour. So this is what a baking science experiment might look like within each of the labs. In this case, I also offer a flour chart for you to compare, because in baking professionally, you will have these types of terms used and these types of protein contents divided up in order to produce certain types of products. Let's go on down. That's great. Here are our first recipes or formulas. So for the first person doing muffins, this would be their actual formula. And the teacher would also use it or could use it. What we did with it was we also plugged in different types of flour as another science experiment if we wanted to. So you see on the right, it says a sample lab team option. We literally gave each lab a different flour and the same formula because it was, and one, of course, produced the control recipe. And they were able to see the difference between those flours, how they performed in the product. We did this summer with Ag in the Classroom teachers, and it was great for every age. Every age could make observations, and that we're talking kindergarten through high school teachers. So I was excited to see how enthusiastic and how much information and science knowledge they were able to inculcate into this lesson. There's the critical thinking. Again, we ask these questions. Here's the formula. You can see now how we list ingredients, we list the measurement and volume, and then we use the weight application as well. We infuse the baking food safety steps into the recipe on purpose because that streamlines it and it's much more easy for you to do it if it's just written into the recipe. And then for the teacher, there's always some type of tip or another piece of guidance that we like to offer you if you want to use it. This case, it was you could actually literally make pancakes instead of muffins if you really prefer to do that. For the intermediate, this is a yeasted bread. It's an English muffin bread with some of the same applications. You will need really close to a 50 to 1 hour class period to do it. You'll see in that text box under the English muffin batter bread, we talk about altitude baking. So there are extra tips we tuck into each lab. And usually those are referred to in the table of contents. So throughout our country, we have various altitudes that we exist at. And of course, baking is impacted by the altitude at which we live. And that gives us, in the glossary, you've got a direct link to it. And then also gives you highlights on what you need to know. I'm going to encourage you to see the May baking calendar on the right there. If you go to our website, every month we offer you a baking calendar for that month, and it has multiple links and features, a few recipes that you may decide, man, I don't think I will use this instead of the one Sharon recommended, or maybe I'd really like to focus on that for a certain event I'm catering in my culinary program. So it gives you ideas and hacks as well for baking. Let's quick scroll down the rest of the way there. And at the end, this is the rubric, this alternatives. You will use that with the baking, and then you'll use this as a sensory analysis form throughout the lab. Finally, the advanced experience bakes one of my favorite breads, the Pilgrim bread, and offers critical thinking. And then clear on down, you're going to get links to Whole Grain Council, and you'll see the local connections at the end. In this case, the local connections are really tied into creating a signature recipe. Now you see these two infographics. One is called baking temperature and one is called baking food safety. Those are all going to be located in the appendix of your lab manual and or a link to them where you can download them. Same way with what happened to the yeast bread. That troubleshooting guide is in the lab manual in the appendix. Okay, let's go back. What's our next slide? There we go. When we look at the ingredient labs, then you were right on that. There you go. When you look at ingredient labs, then you see each one is an entirely different topic. Each has exactly what you saw in lab 3. It has all of those attributes or sections, and each one of them will have a different science lab for baking based on the ingredient. If we go to Lab 7 quick, let's take a peek at that one. It has a cookie science one, and I'm going to bring that up to you because in family and consumer sciences, there has been, I battled it for years when I first started teaching. It seemed like everybody wanted me to bake cookies for this event or that event. And I know I had colleagues who got really tired of being viewed as the cookie bakers. And yet, when I talked to Aaron Clanton about cookies, he said, Sharon, there's more science in baking a cookie than there is in almost anything else. And so don't get your back up too much, Sharon. Think about what you can do to make it more of a scientific approach. So in this lab, we have the benefit of working with the Sugar Association. You see the realsugar.org or sugar.org provides you with entire baking STEAM for junior high and high school on what is sugar, why is it important to use sugar versus the sugar replacements, the non-caloric sweeteners, what is the difference? And in baking, I wanted to focus on what it would do in a product. So you see the terms and techniques, you see the lists of the different types of sugars, and then you move on into the lab. Again, you see the same attributes we had in the other lab. Outcome stated we have history. The computer lab itself allows you to visit that website, sugar.org, and to see photosynthesis, how sugar functions, how it's made, how it's developed. All of that is available at their site. Then we have also a word search that ties into that computer lab. It allows the student to be looking for certain terms, which are, of course, in the terms and techniques as well. The baking science lab is the one I wanted to land on, and it basically takes the opportunity to work with a whole wheat sugar cookie. And then again, you're transferring in and out different ingredients to see what the outcome would be. And officially, Americans, they like thin cookies. They might like crisp cookies. They might like chewy cookies. So it becomes a piece of consumer science too. And how do you achieve those types of cookies is all related to the formulation. And this allows the student, instead of just substituting different flours like we did in Lab 3, we substitute different flour, different fat, different sugars, all to see how we can achieve that thin, crisp, or chewy attribute that people want. Let's go back. Let's see. Yeah, go ahead and scroll down a minute. That's fine. So you see the lab teams are divided up. There's your rubric. I just want to reassure you that those rubrics are there for you. They are not perfect. They are very simplified. So you may decide, nah, Sharon, I've got a better way to do this. And that's okay. But at least you've got the beginnings of how to compare the different substitutions that we chose. And you may choose different ones. Okay, let's go to what's next. Labs 12 and 13 are about consumer adding value. So lab 12 focuses on dough sculpting. But I want to just say throughout the labs, we focus on costing, which never, ever was a popular thing with my students. I don't know if you have happy students when you say, let's cost that recipe. But mine were like, oh, Mrs. Davis, I hate this job. But we would often do it together. We didn't do it for every recipe, but part of my strategy, of course, is the economics at home. You want that student to be able to say, oh my goodness, that $5 piece of banana bread that I saw at Dunkin' Donuts is really only going to cost me 50 cents to make or less. And they begin to get the aha moments of how they could save money. And we would work with that throughout the lab manual, whether it's pizza or focaccia as a sandwich or any of these attributes. If they do it themselves, they learn what the cost is. And they can think about doing it for themselves at home instead of a fast food venue, which costs them more. And in my opinion, fast food, if that's what we rely on to eat, then we haven't really achieved either culinary science nor home economics. The economy of the home relies on us knowing how to do these things. So in Lab 12, we look at that, but we also look at what adds value. So If you make the dough in this lab, it's a potato refrigerator dough. You have $1 piece of dough and then you braid it. You can sell it for $8 when it really was, if you just sold it as a plain old loaf of bread, might have been sold for $2.50. Nowadays market, it might be $3, but that's how you add value in baking, is partly that you know how to shape it, how to format it, and package it. Any of those things make a difference. Then in Lab 13, we give you a whole host of resources that you should have, whether it's food safety or how to package, how to store and handle ingredients. And we provide you with, in the lower right corner, you will see a newsletter, and then you see an education guide. Both of those are available online. The newsletter is archived, but you can sign up and get it for each month. That allows you to have the latest ingredients or the latest resources we have from our industry members. And then the education guide is all live linked, so download it. If you see it printed, that's lovely, but it's really most dynamic. Download it, and then you can live link into those resources. Next slide, please. The appendix then offers you literally 75 pages of resources. Most of them are standalone. I don't want to read the list to you, but you see something like baking temperatures. It's so critical. It gives you the process temperatures and the internal temperatures. It talks about ovens, why you don't just let your students stand there with the door open on the oven, take their product out, test it, and leave the door open. It shows the drop in the temperature. So that temperature guide alone is one of my most favorite pieces that I asked ThermoWorks to put together for this lab and for the website. There's just more and more and more. Every ingredient has something there for you to explore, and most of them are really attractive infographics ready for you to go. Next slide. The glossary, I want us to just visit it quickly, but it's the one that the terms and techniques goes to. It literally allows you to get links to other resources that go with that term or that technique. And so when you look at our website, here we are. You see the drop-down boxes across the top: home, about, leaders, glossary, visuals. Visuals are infographics and videos. The glossary tab is this one. That's the one that links. So literally every term and technique that's in the lab manual can be found by alphabetically going down through the glossary. When you get to something in tan, for example, if you clicked on that journey is a video that's awesome. It will take you to that short video about the growing of grain, the actual production of it. It's one of the best, as long as you get to avoid the ads, it's one of the best that I think I have seen in many years about the journey of wheat from field to table. Okay, let's go back. So that's just one video that's tucked into the link is in your lab manual, but it's also in the glossary on our website. The other one I want you to look at is members. I'm going to flip over there. I think our recipe section is pretty weak, but our members are really important to you in career and tech. So ADM, for example, the very first one, they are doing so much with regenerative agriculture. You go to their website, you will also see a whole raft of career opportunities. So that's just one, but most of our members, if we go back to the other members, you're going to find that many milling companies, many ingredient companies are short on employees. They want to bring people into their career. So we are a cross-section field to table. So we have read everything from wheat to sugar to, cornmeal to yeast. And all of these links provide you with something about that industry member and connections to their job opportunities in many cases. So in Ardent Mills, for example, is like the third largest mill in the country. They have innovation labs. You can go to those. You can learn about job opportunities that start at $50,000 a year and up, all to do with milling or baking or ingredient science, food science. Let's see. You see the tab for newsletter. We don't have to click on it, but I want just to remind you, you go to newsletter. That's the one I was talking about. Sign up if you haven't. And we also have blogs and the baking calendar, and they are all archived there as well. Okay, let's go back. I know my time is nearly up here, isn't it? On this page, you'll see some of the images that are in our glossary, but when you look in the upper right-hand corner, you see vanilla, for example. It's it's something that we bake with all the time, but most of us don't know very much about the farming, where it comes from, the facts, how do you compare the different types? All of that is produced for you by Rodell Kitchens. So in the glossary, you'll find it, in our lab manual, you'll find it, but allowing enough time for the students to explore just one additional ingredient is a great assignment. And we actually have a topic assignment in the appendix where the student is asked to pick another ingredient and explore it. In the right, you see that little mixer. I put that on there because that's Baker Betty's icon. And Baker Betty and Chef Gemma Stafford and Aaron Clanton from K-State are all three associate members. And Baker Betty and Gemma Stafford are two of the best tutorial teachers for professional bakers that are online and available to you. So don't hesitate to go to those links, and you will find, let's say you just literally know nothing about how to produce pastry, you can do a tutorial on pastry, etc. Next slide. And finally, I just want to remind you totally to focus on the whole person. That is what makes it really good career in tech, in my opinion, is when the person, because family consumer sciences begins with the individual and the family and the home, you are able to start with the base of Maslow's hierarchy, where you actually address making sure that the young person will have food, water, warmth, and a good place to rest, to be safe. And from there, that's all part of the idea of knowing how to prepare food, how to actually obtain food, how to have the skills for that. It's just one attribute of that. But then as that develops, the belongingness, the love and the needs and the esteem needs come from sharing, from giving, from thinking about something beyond yourself. And then that feeling of accomplishment that, oh yeah, I did all of these things that helped provide for my home or my community, or it's going to help me have a job someday. I can explore this potential interest I have. I can be fulfilled in it. And baking literally serves every level of that when we teach, as we hope you will do with this lab manual, teach that full scope of experience and the whole person's value. This young man has whole grain chocolate waffles. He made these in an after-school program. I was helped by a couple of my FACS students. And that's what I mean by sharing and giving. We have a whole page called Bake to Give on our website. And I'll encourage you to come up with your own best strategies. But when you do, be sure you enter our award content, our award that we give a teacher every year. It's not a contest. It's an opportunity for your student or you to submit a great idea that we can share with other people. I know I need to stop now. Are there questions, Melanie and Arnessa, that you would like me to address, or that you see us, something that I've left out?
I have a question. So I taught in Arkansas for 16 years, and I had a lab class every year. And this is something that we're seeing more of nowadays, but how should our teachers address the food allergy issue and even the picky eater, to try to encourage their students to try? I know that baking from scratch is really good for those that have the food allergies, but what advice would you give teachers for those things?
Well, it is a huge challenge, Melanie, and I just completely recognize that. But the way I was handling it and feel like I've asked just last year, I asked a couple teachers about how do they handle this, and they said, well, first of all, you do an entry when students enter your classroom, obviously you're going to learn about those allergies, and they're usually very open about them now. It isn't like people are afraid to say, I have gluten, I'm gluten sensitive, or I'm gluten intolerant. They might not want to say that they have celiac, but by then most students in their class know the ones that have what you would call they would have to have a shot if they experienced an ingredient. So I'm taking a long way around to say that you have to respect those absolutely. And you may have to designate a lab that is if they're truly celiac and cannot even be around flour, you have a problem in that you may have to have a separate location for them to do gluten-free food preparation. And we have at least two members who do an excellent job with providing formulas. One is King Arthur Baking, and one is Red Star Yeast. And then extension offers, and those are links in our glossary for you to give you guidance. If the student just simply can't eat it, they could still be around it. That makes it easier for you to actually teach gluten-free. Let them have a lab space, but at least they can be in the same room when you do a preparation. And then everything has to be very well labeled. I think that labeling is the key to that. If you produce a product, you label the food label with every ingredient that's in it. And once you do a lab, you make sure that they've looked through the recipe and they know how to label what's in it. It's a great food science test to actually change out ingredients. So let's say you have a student who cannot have eggs. In the egg lab, we do that. We do egg substitutes, and it becomes the project of the whole class. That is one way to allow the student who has that one issue to not just be, I don't know, called out, so to speak. Instead, the whole class uses it as a consumer challenge. And it's far more meaningful for them to all try to bake a product that is vegan, for example, and has no animal product in it or has no egg in it. Let them all take a stab at changing one ingredient until they find something that works. That becomes a much more meaningful project than, let's say, an Iron Chef or a baking competition would be, because it's real world, it's real life. Second half of that question had to do with food, just dislikes. That's why you do sensory analysis. And in the lab manual, you'll find a simplified sensory analysis tasting sheet in at least 3 of the different labs, and it's in the appendix. It's called a matter of taste. And then it also has a rubric that breaks it down. You require the student to not use terms like yuck or ick or blah, or I'm not going to taste that, or that looks like garbage, or worse. I mean, they may using words you don't want used. You cannot use those words in my lab. You as a teacher don't allow it. You have them actually conduct a sensory analysis. If they cannot, they think they're going to throw up. If they try eating something, you would excuse them. I mean, you can't make somebody do that, but you do. Usually a student who has produced a product is much more likely to try it. In other words, you don't force it on them because I made it. You let them try it because you made it.
Yeah.
Does that help?
Yes, that's great. Thank you.
Other questions? Other comments? Very good question.
Thank
I
you.
didn't say much about timing, but the whole goal in this lab was to be able to find ways to break labs down into 42-minute sections. I wanted to be sure my students could bake, and we did it with yeast. We baked with it. We baked almost everything that I could have dreamed of baking. And the way we did that was to break it down. And the lab gives many, many tips on how to do that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we really appreciate you going over this lab manual and how to use it most efficiently in our foods and culinary courses. And I think even though I've been through the manual, I've learned so much just in this, short amount of time with you going through it. So we really appreciate that.
Thanks. I hope it's helpful.